Okay, I think we can begin. Just want to share my screen quickly. Okay, so today we're going to be doing Learning Unit 5, and I have put theme 1 and theme 2 together purely because it's speaking the same sort of language in terms of the fourth industrial revolution in conjunction with the supply chain of various industries, etc. And I don't want to lose the momentum by now moving a learning unit 2 into a pre-recorded session. So if I can try and do all of this into this session, which is not a lot of information, but it's also pertinent information that you can use in your assignment as well as in your examination because it's information that allows you to think out of the box a little bit more. So I'll complete all of that today. And then on the 30th of September, we're going to be doing Learning Unit 6, Theme 1. So what I'll do in that session is half of the session I'm going to use to go over your pacer for your assignment 2. So similarly, how we had done assignment 1, we're going to do the same thing for assignment 2. So we're going to use half of that session on the 30th of September. So as many people to join as possible, please. Um, Everyone would have gotten their assignment results by now, which is great. So well done to everybody. I just need to see whether it was released on ARC. So I'll check that out tonight. And then just a final announcement from my side is you would have seen emails go out or announcements on ARC actually, where I released your ICE 3 as well as your ICE 4 already. The reason being is I don't want to hold it and then paste it out because your final due date for everything is the 6th of October. I think it's the 6th or is it the 9th? I think it's the 9th of October. Um, and I need all of that basically submitted on that particular date because it doesn't give me a very long period to grade the ICE tasks and then submit it. So slowly we started seeing ICE tasks being submitted, but not everybody does submit it. Remember that every ICE task that you submit, you guaranteed a result for, especially for your CAS mark. So it is absolutely important that you guys submit your ICE task because it does account for 10% of your CAS mark. Um, and it's as much as I grade it and we look through sort of working examples, etc. um so having a submission alone shows me that you are sort of understanding the gist of the module as we're going along, but it still helps you from a cast perspective. So please make sure that you, even if you're submitting all four before the 6th, or before the 9th, whatever that date is. Let me just double check quickly. Um, it's the 6th. As long as you're submitting every single ICE trust before the 6th of October, you will be perfectly fine. Okay. Um, okay, so let's move on. So today's module, our focus is going to be on the fourth industrial revolution, or as we call it, 4IR. Um, and you'll see how we sort of go into what is sort of the strengths, the weaknesses, how it coincides with supply chains of businesses, and then what is sort of the next step from 4IR, whether it's an industry 5.0 or whatever it may be. But we're sort of just going to go through how it works in our framework from a supply chain perspective. So when we're talking about the fourth industrial revolution, or 4IR specifically, it's basic it's the current era, so where we're currently at in terms of technological advancement, and it's also rapid technological advancement, especially when we're looking at it from a first world perspective. And it sort of blurs the lines between what is physical, what is digital, what is biological um, worlds. And everything sort of is either driven by developments in artificial intelligence, whether it's robotics, the Internet of Things, anything from a blockchain perspective. 3D printing is huge now. Quantum computing is also huge. Virtual reality, and I mean, a lot of people who have kids, the kids nowadays are also sort of shifting, especially when they're sort of pre-teens, are shifting towards virtual reality in a way, from PlayStation or a Nintendo, whatever it is. That's sort of the way where a lot of our or the younger generation is shifting towards. Um, so when we're talking about from a connectivity perspective, especially from digital connectivity, um, there's a lot from a collaboration perspective, especially when we are looking at how it impacts human collaboration. So a lot of it has to do with innovation. You want to find better ways to do things. How can you better um, substantiate your supply chain? How can your supply chain now work better for you within your business? Um, Distributed manufacturing. So when you are manufacturing, you already know what your distribution process is going to be thereafter. And then collaboration, whether it's between suppliers, between customers, whether it's your customers, your customer suppliers, wherever there is some sort of synergy, is where you would want to see 4IR or innovation being developed. So when we're looking at the fourth industrial revolution specifically, and if we want to say, let's use logistics as a, I'll just leave it on this page because I just want to have a quick discussion. Let's use logistics as an example. So I am obviously in that industry, so it's what I can speak about the best. So when you're talking the fourth industrial revolution, especially in a logistics framework, there's a lot of technologies that's now being developed or introduced into the market that's basically revolutionizing logistics. It makes the supply chain a lot more smarter, faster, brings in a lot more efficiency, and it also pushes something from a more of a customer focused reality as opposed to just doing things because you basically have to do it. So a lot of times, if we have to look at like artificial intelligence, for instance, if businesses in the logistics sector, and this is anything from whether you're a courier company, a delivery vehicle, a line hauler, or a shipping line, or an air freight controller, or air freight airline, um, AI being used. I mean, from that benefit specifically, it's you can predict a lot of the demand. You can do pre-route planning, pre-optimized routes, and a lot of times now, and a lot of times of where logistics companies are going is customer service. So whether it's a AI chatbot, where they're able to give real-time update to customers, as opposed to having a call center of 500 people, manning a telephone. Your chatbot basically does everything and it reads from your back end of your system exactly what your status history is of a container or a parcel, etc. um, you know, we talk a lot about robotics and automation. So the automation of warehouses where everything is barcoded, um, put into different bays. You look at, how you can speed up your sorting a lot quicker, um, especially when you are um, um, pre-scanning or when an order comes in, you're now scanning an order out. You now have an automatic update on stock take, so your inventory stock take level then becomes adjusted immediately. So this is a lot of times where your innovation sort of comes into play. And obviously more from a first world perspective, you're talking about autonomous vehicles, you're talking about drones, where you can get deliveries done a lot more quicker, reduce sort of your reliance on the human element to the human driver, you know, from an autonomous perspective. I don't think we are there yet from a South African perspective, but it is something that, especially from a first world perspective, they're pushing out drone deliveries, they're pushing out autonomous drivers, autonomous vehicles. I mean, there's a lot of things that you don't get when you're looking at an autonomous vehicle is um, you don't get absenteeism, people being sick, absconding from a specific route, whatever the case may be, what the human element is, you don't necessarily get. But as in with most, there's pros and cons. Um, and I'll give you some example, like for instance, like Amazon, okay, they use robots in their warehouses and they use AI to basically help predict what products you might want to buy. Okay, so basically, if you have an existing cart, based on what your history was, they sort of understand, where you're headed to go, and that's what advertisements they basically push through to you on social media or on their homepage on their, when you log onto your account, etc. Then you have DHL. DHL is a German-based company. They use, from a warehouse picking perspective, like smart resources or smart glasses where they can pick, pick and pack automatically. And they also use autonomous vehicles from a last mile perspective, especially from a Germany side. Um, and then like different companies like more from a state side, FedEx and UPS is huge there from a logistics industry, and they use a lot of algorithms built in from a route optimization side where they can plan their route out properly in order for them to save on fuel, save on time, and then they push forward as an express business and not a last mile, DBC economy business. You can get stuff out there a lot quicker to the customers because of their route optimization algorithm. I mean, you tell me to go and deliver in a specific area and you give me 40 parcels. I go from point A to Z to B to K, because I don't have that route optimization algorithm. And I'm also not someone that's experienced enough to take out 40 shipments to deliver it in a specific route. Okay, so there's a lot of benefits, as we know, with getting faster deliveries, you're lowering your cost as much as possible. Um, so you have better customer satisfaction, your sustainability is a lot better. You either eco-friendly from a route perspective, or whether it's autonomous vehicles, maybe it's electric vehicles. So there's a lot that you can look at, especially from a 4IR side. Okay, and this is just basically mentioning a lot of from a new era perspective when you're talking about supply chain. I think we did speak a lot about it. So from an automation and robotics side, I spoke about it from a warehousing perspective, how that can, step into business and how it can help from automation of warehouses or speeding up, different elements like packaging or sorting, etc. When we're looking at Internet of Things, it's how we can do real-time statuses, whether it's from a complete operations and logistics operations perspective, whether it's tracking of vehicles, tracking of containers, tracking of inventory from a manufacturing perspective. Artificial intelligence, a lot of times it comes in with optimizing routes, automating your chatbots, etc. Big data analytics, and I think this is quite big with a lot of businesses that are focused primarily on forecasting, especially if they're in the production, the manufacturing business. So how it can help to improve forecasting, better inventory management standards. So it can help businesses to make better decisions at the end of the day. Blockchain, it's basically how you can um, sort of verify your different supply chain transactions through documentation, etc. Cloud computing, you want to connect global supply chains so that you have data sharing, you have collaboration between different businesses. And then the last one is 3D printing, which we all know and love. And it's just basically taking businesses to a whole new level. I don't know if everyone has seen, but the viral WhatsApp statuses or the TikTok videos of people making little 3D images of their vehicles and themselves and all of these things. I mean, that's the new era of 3D printing, and it's not a cheap one as well. I've got a customer where we move a lot of 3D printers for, and I mean, the stuff is flying off the shelf. Even those different ribbons that go in there, it is amazing the amount of people that have now started using 3D printing as like hobbies for themselves. Okay, then we have opportunities. So when we're looking at opportunities specifically, I want to first go over, before I go over the specific opportunities here, I want to talk about like different field opportunities or career opportunities. So when we're talking about the fourth industrial revolution, there's a lot of different job and career opportunities that now open up because of our IR. Whether it's from a tech perspective, a robotics side, cybersecurity, even logistically, you need somebody that is a smart logistics coordinator or a drone operator for that instance. Every industry now has different career opportunities. So even with 4IR now coming into play with AI and robotics and automation and stuff like that, there's still a lot of human interaction and human development that needs to go into the back end. So that is 100%, something that you can look at from an opportunity perspective. Also from a business side, there's a lot of growth and innovation. So it gives businesses a lot of tools to automate their businesses and processes to lower their costs, how better they can get, customer experiences over the line. They can personalize their services a whole lot better compared to previously, and also enter new markets. So if you were previously a brick and mortar company or a business, you can now move into an e-commerce or a .com space where um, you can facilitate deliveries to your customers um, based on the product that you're selling. And you can not only do it from a national perspective, but a global perspective. Then we have entrepreneurship. So I know a lot of times when and we just spoke about 3D printing. It's how you can now become an entrepreneur based on 3D printing. And that's a lot of times what people who are buying those massive 3D printers are now doing. They're printing it for events or small businesses, just to take businesses to a whole nother level. Even if it's from an e-commerce platform perspective, when you're talking about automation, integration, and collaboration specifically, if you are setting up an e-commerce website, you need a whole lot of um, internet of things or blockchain theories to start up your interface itself. A lot of creativity that goes into play, a lot of you know AI, even if it's something from a robotic perspective, whatever the case may be. But it a lot of the AI driven tools can be used from an entrepreneurship perspective. So that's just sort of speaking on different sort of industries where there is opportunity specifically. Then we want to look at the actual opportunity from a holistic perspective, right? So we want to look at how you can increase your efficiency and your automation, especially from an automation perspective. What happens is it streamlines your ops, it streamlines your processes, it reduces a lot of your manual errors that would occur if you didn't have 4IR present, and also speeds up your processing. You don't need that many human or manual intervention, especially when it does come to either production process or a manufacturing process. You can now make it a lot more automated.
Sorry, ma'am. I just
Um,
want to interrupt you. Sorry. Your audio is a little bit low.
so,
And I tried to increase it as much as I could. So I don't want it to affect your recording because even I'm trying to like squash my earphones closer to my ear because I'm
oh,
battling to hear.
sorry.
That's better.
Is it any
That's
better
better.
now? Okay,
Much
okay. I
better.
think I just need to hold my mic closer
Much
to me
better.
now. Okay. Thank you. Um, Okay, so we spoke about efficiency and automation. Then we want to go into real-time visibility. So when we're looking at something like Internet of Things, where we have real-time tracking and tracing and real-time updates, there's a lot of like connected devices that provide these real-time tracking and updates across the supply chain, whether it is from a raw material perspective, where you're ordering raw material, right down to a delivery side. You want to be able to understand if you are importing, containers of raw material. When is your container now going to be ready? When is it now lodged onto a specific ocean line? When are you now expecting delivery? When can you now unpack the container? When does manufacturing happen? And then once that's done, when does it go into inventory and then get sold and delivered to a final customer? So real-time visibility does help, and Internet of Things does help from that perspective. As long as there's integration at some point, you'll be able to fully have visibility of your full supply chain, basically. Then we're going into another opportunity, which is enhanced forecasting. So when we're looking at this specific um, portion of the business, you want to have different algorithms that can use the data sets that you do have to understand your fluctuations in your demand. Where is the different bottlenecks in your supply chain? So how can you now release some of those bottlenecks? And then what's the different market trends in that specific industry that you're operating in? So a lot of times what would happen, especially before AI was introduced and before, sort of the 4IR was introduced, is everything was done manually. It was done based on data sets. What was your peak last year? What was your demand last year? You add 10, 20%, and this is your forecast for this year. AI allows you to look at different market trends, look at social media a lot to understand who's your competition, what's their sort of analysis on demands, where you're going to see is potential problems, all of these things, and finds solutions for you specifically. Then we have sustainability. So a lot of time for IR, especially the tech driven behind the fourth industrial revolution, it allows for businesses to optimize their resources as much as possible. So how best you can use your driver or how best you can use your supervisor, how can you reduce waste as much as possible? How can you also lower your carbon footprint? So sustainability is huge right now, especially in a lot of businesses when they want to go more into green supply chain or eco-friendly businesses, or looking at potentially like a Six Sigma, for instance, which is a lean tool, but also promotes sustainability. If I have an operations flow within a logistics environment and I have freight processors processing cargo and they have to walk from a kilometer from where they offloading a truck to where they need to put the cargo, every single step that that person makes costs me money at the end of the day, and it's also not sustainable. So how can I make sure that my operations is the most economical that it can be and the most sustainable that it can be, that I can reduce the number of steps that that individual walks in order for me to get the same result? Do I need to now move my base closer to offloading point? But then what happens when my drivers come in? So it's now realizing what your entire supply chain for that specific operation is looking like and how you can reevaluate it and optimize the resources that you currently have. Okay. Then we have something called decentralized manufacturing. So when we're looking at decentralized manufacturing, we want to look at how you can bring production now closer to your consumer, whether it is them looking at a spatial location, meaning that it's now closer to your manufacturing is closer to your consumer, so your delivery cost is lower. You now have faster to market lead time, you have less wastages, whatever the case may be, but it's how can you now get to your customer a lot quicker or get to your supplier a lot quicker. So understanding what is more important. Is it costing you more money to bring in raw material, or is it costing you more money to do final delivery to your customer? And a lot of businesses work the decentralized manufacturing route because it makes sense for them logistically, especially if they're manufacturing and their distribution happens on a national basis. If your target market, let's say for instance, you sell surfing equipment or surfing gear, and your biggest target market is Cape Town and you're currently sitting in Durban, it makes no sense because you're now paying an arm and a leg for transport costs to get all of that material to Cape Town to every single customer, where you can have a decentralized facility now sitting in Cape Town. You can get an overnight delivery as opposed to a 3-day delivery. So it's looking at people's supply chain in a lot more decentralized way. And then the last one is a supply chain resilience. And when we look at supply chain resilience, it's understanding what sort of tools that is available from a digital perspective that can help get us faster responses to any sort of disruptions. Um, a lot of businesses, especially during the pandemic, had to go on a more resilient supply chain because they now had to account for lockdown and not being able to go out for 21 days or whatever the case may be. They had to have special permits, all of these things. So it's understanding now How can you respond faster to these sort of disruptions, whether it is changing the scope of your business so that you are selling a product that is a what was the word they used to call it in COVID? Um, it was like special deliveries, like if it was medication, etc. Um, it was using those, shifting your business into going more towards that perspective. So in my previous lifetime and my previous company, when COVID hit, obviously all corporate customers had stopped trading. So obviously your revenue plummets down. Um, so we shifted the goalpost a little bit, and this is where you know your supply chain is very resilient. We were targeting now the consumer, so the man on the street that needed medication and needed sort of important elements in life, not in business, in life. Whether it was medication or sending something to your kid that lives in Johannesburg, whatever the case may be. Yes, resources were limited, but it shifted the goalpost completely for our specific supply chain. And we were able to then still be sustainable in that time period, which is good, because we still kept our doors open, we still paid our staff, we didn't retrench people, there was a lot more elements that just worked at that time. Okay, so that's basically our opportunities covered in a nutshell. Then we're going to go through some of our threats. Okay, so when we're looking at threats, we obviously, despite all of the benefits that we had gone through, the fourth industrial revolution as well can have a lot of risks, it can have a lot of challenges, especially for supply chain systems itself, because you're obviously going very tech driven, very automated driven, etc. So the first one is cybersecurity risks. And we all know how that works, especially if your entire life is now online. You now have so much of reliance on everything that's automated, everything that's digital, the internet of things, etc. And they creep into your life very quickly. So they make your supply chain a lot more vulnerable to cyber attacks, whether it's a cyber attack, whether it's a data breach in your business, whether it's a system hack, whatever the case may be. But businesses are very prone to this, especially if they don't have a good enough firewall. It allows for, whether it's a competitor or a threat in the market to come in and disrupt your supply chain specifically. So that's what happens more especially when you are so heavily reliant on digital systems itself or digital technology itself. Then we have high implementation costs. So you must know that when you're talking about automation and drones and integration and Internet of Things and blockchain theories and automated forecasting, etc. These things all sound very nice and fancy, but it's also very expensive. So it requires a large, significantly large investment upfront. Especially to adopt some of these technologies, whether it's from an infrastructure perspective, whether it's from a software and hardware perspective, or whether it's just adopting people that are skilled to work on that sort of um, digital technology. You obviously can't have someone that has previously just worked off manual all the time to work the same amount on a completely fully tech driven aspect of the business. So somebody that is skilled and well trained, I mean, that can come at a pretty penny as well. Then we have job displacements. So obviously you're now introducing a lot of tech in the business that replaces people, or replaces, your human role or your human labor, especially in businesses that is focused on warehousing, because you now can pick pack everything with half the amount of people because everything is automated. Secondly, transport. If you're going the autonomous route, then you're obviously replacing drivers itself and vehicle assistance, whatever the case may be. And then the third one is customer services. So whether you are in a logistics environment or a any environment for that matter. If you are a clothing company that works, that has a call center and people call you to now do returns and complain about quality, you can completely automate that into a chat box, where you can say press 4 for a return, and now you're clicking 4 on your WhatsApp. Once you do that, then a return Weibo number is now being sent and a collection is immediately booked for you. So there's a whole lot because of AI specifically that you can't replace these elements, and what can now lead to potential unemployment, potential social disruption as well. People now have less disposable income or no income at all. That can create a lot of disruption from a social perspective. Strikes, um, potential strike losses, etc. Like that. Then we have an over reliance on technology. So it means that you are so dependent as a business on technology that when there's an impact on your supply chain, and your supply chain has any sort of disruption or any sort of failure or malfunction, whatever the case may be, you don't know how to survive because you're so reliant on having that technology to now control your supply chain. You don't know how to go back into basics. And it is reality. So when I first started in the logistics industry, all collections were manual. Okay, you had to write down, someone wants a collection, you write down a collection detail on a piece of paper, whatever it is. You now call the driver and say, please, can you pick up from person ABC at address XYZ? Now everything is automated. The customer puts in a label on the system, an automatic collection is booked, it gets linked to the driver then goes to the person and they collect, and the loop is now closed. But let that system go down, people will not know how to function on a manual basis anymore. People don't answer their cell phones. They barely read WhatsApp messages. How do you now um, manage to go back to basics? And it's all of us being over reliant on technology itself. Even us in a, from a, let's say, an internet banking perspective, everything is done via internet banking that we never go into a bank unless it's really dire need that we need to go. I mean, even our bank cards are being delivered to us at home. So it's us being so heavily reliant on it that we don't know how to get back to basics as well. So it does open up a little bit of vulnerability there. Then you have an increase in complexity, especially within the supply chain. So, while some sort of, tasks or processes, etc., become a lot more easier because you're now going into the technology route, it also creates a lot of complexity in your supply chain, whether it's from a management perspective or how you're coordinating it. It does create complexity, and then also shifting it back to over reliance on technology, it makes it impossible for us to get back to basics because we are so heavily reliant on the technology. Complexity is then built into a automation or built into a tech. Um, and we just keep adding new layers and new layers and new layers of the complexity for us to try and get better and better and better. And then the last one is data privacy and regulatory challenges. And especially with something like AI or the Internet of Things, it collects a lot of information, a lot of sensitive data, a lot of sensitive information. So we have to have a privacy concern. In South Africa, obviously, the POPI Act came into play because your data is just everywhere. The amount of spam calls people get is ridiculous. So it's because your information is not out there. So it does allow a lot of businesses from an AI perspective, to collect a lot of private data. And you can have a lot of, compliance issues specifically, whether it's, according from a law perspective, you obviously are not following through with what you should be following through on. I know even, from a logistics perspective, they you try and keep the information, especially when you're doing conditional deliveries. Like I'm delivering a bank card to you, I'm delivering a cell phone, I need a FICA document and a RICA document and an ID copy. That's all, private data that I now need to keep for that specific customer. And a lot of times when that's uploaded on a system, you need to have very good, internet firewalls, etc., so that that information doesn't go, get misled into something else. Okay, then this was obviously part of your learning unit specifically. I think it was learning unit 2, if I'm not mistaken, is sort of like the influences from a pandemic perspective. Okay. So we all been through COVID-19, etc. And a lot of the times the pandemic specifically exposed a lot of vulnerabilities in global supply chains, especially if you're a global industry in your global supply chain. So what had happened was people have learned from that experience, and they now sort of put down the accelerator in adopting 4IR technologies, whether it is to build something that's more resilient, maybe more agile, and maybe creating even more of a localized system. So the first one is when we're shifting from something that is globalization to regionalization, its companies are moving away from heavily globalized supply chain, whether it means you were purchasing previously from global companies from a raw material perspective or even a finished good perspective. You're now trying to do it more from a region perspective because you're trying to meet the timelines. When the pandemic hit, it was impossible to get stock into the ports, whether it was Durban, Cape Town, or Richards Bay. It was almost impossible to get it into South Africa. And if it did, it took 90 to 120 days to get here, which throws people's supply chain completely off, and they would not know how to function if they have now no stock. So now it's putting emphasis specifically on having regional hubs, trying to do a lot more nearshoring than offshoring, and having your local suppliers so that you can reduce dependency on having international suppliers or sourcing from like global sources, etc. So shifting from global to more regional and to more local. Then it's building a resilient and flexible supply chain. So you want to focus on, and a lot of businesses did, on mitigating as much risk as possible and having flexibility so that you can handle disruptions. If you have something that's quite rigid in terms of a supply chain, when something like the pandemic hits, you cannot be flexible enough to change your scope of your business, change your values, change your goals, etc. So adopting different plans like scenario planning or um, you know real-time monitoring on stuff from a raw material to a delivery perspective, and also redundant sourcing. You want to be able to find sources everywhere, whether it's local, regional, or global, but what's going to work best for your supply chain specifically. Then we're seeing a lot increased use of digitization and a lot from a technology perspective. So there's been a huge surge in businesses adopting like big data analytics or artificial intelligence within their business. I mean, most courier or logistics companies have now adopted AI in a bot specific business, um, from a communication to customer services, etc. Something from a cloud-based platform. So a lot of businesses are going cloud-based platforms as well, just to make whether it's a procurement process or the finance process a whole lot easier. And also from a predictive analytics, when we look at forecasting, how best to forecast, maybe it's a political instability, maybe it's something that's geopolitical, whatever the case may be, but it's focusing on something more that is more digitized towards forecasting for your business specifically. Then you also want to focus on your supply chain agility. So you want to have fast adaptation to demand fluctuations, to any sort of disruptions that's in the market or in the network, and you want to shift it towards an on-demand manufacturing. So similarly, how you have a just-in-time manufacturing process where you are producing just in time in terms of your order, understanding what your production or manufacturing process timeline is, and then building your forecast based on that, and also having a dynamic logistics system, whether it's a route optimization planning, whatever the case may be, but you're focusing on having agility in your supply chain. Then you have sustainability and risk management or supply chain risk management. Um, and here you want to have, from a sustainability perspective, you want to have sort of a good environmental impact or a good, corporate social responsibility. These are sort of like a lot of the priorities that businesses are now taking into account, as opposed to just looking at profit share and EBITDA and all of these things. So using your 4IR tools to look at how best you can reduce your waste, reduce your carbon emissions, improve your maybe it's your RFP or your procurement process so that you have a more ethical sourcing process as opposed to just, points 1 to 3, what's your BE status, those sort of questions. You want to go more into how can my partner or my strategic advisor in terms of a supplier help contribute towards my business. So it's asking questions differently, I suppose. Then you have supply diversification. So moving away from having a single source dependent and going more towards multiple sources so that you have a lesser risk in your business. And then you have sort of e-commerce growth and localization. So local production increasing. So make that on the rise because we're now shifting from globalization completely, and having a last mile delivery option because a lot of businesses shifted to e-commerce as opposed to staying prompt with having just a stand up brick and mortar store, and then integrating a lot from a AI, a robotics, data analytics perspective. Right now, every company that is on an e-commerce platform can actually integrate with 95% of the courier companies. So any order that comes in is automatically pushed through to the courier. There's no such thing as you now having to manually type in. Everything is integrated right now, right down to your warehouse management system. And then the last one is collaborative partnership. So when we look at collaborative partnership, we want to increase as much collaboration with everybody, whether it's a manufacturer, a supplier, person who gives us technical support, logistics firms, even government, if that's what it calls for, where you want to do a lot of data sharing, you want to do a lot of JVs or joint innovation projects, how best you can build resilience in the business, etc. So this is just some of the influences. So the so when the pandemic basically hit the world, I don't think it so much has disrupted supply chain. It did harm. I mean, a lot of businesses had gone through liquidations, had lost business profiles, etc. But it also transformed a lot of businesses. It allowed businesses to say, hey, here's my risk in my supply chain, let me now minimize it as much as I possibly can. So it pushed businesses to go into 4IR, go into tech, go into automation, pushing them to become a lot more digital, a lot more resilient, and also have a lot more of a local front as opposed to looking at things from a very global sector perspective. Okay. And then we come to the last one, right, which is where do we go after 4IR? So when we look, not so much after 4IR, but more so after 4.0, right? But it's Industry 5.0 specifically. It focuses on you having a human element or human centric element combined with a lot of the technologies within your business, because a lot of times humans bring in the creativity, they bring in the different intuition, they bring in a lot more from a personalization perspective. So it builds, human element builds on automation, it builds on intelligence. That was your 4IRs that we've already mentioned. So but Industry 5.0 basically puts people back at the center and puts technology now around them. Okay. So obviously the core goal here is to make sure that you have your human machine collaboration or human tech collaboration, so that you have mass personalization, you have sustainability, you have a more agile supply chain, you have more resilience in your supply chain and in your production. Um, And there's various key elements which I'll go over. But the first one is having an enhanced human machine collaboration. And it's called collaborative robots. Okay, so I think it's cobots, if I'm not mistaken. So it works alongside a human and it doesn't replace a human specifically because they focus is on augmenting a human skill or a human element, but not replacing the human skill or the human element. There will still always be a human intervention throughout anything that you would do. If you work in a business or an industry where you go out, you're an extrovert and you sell your product or you sell your business, it is impossible for a robot or a machine to be doing that because people buy from people at the end of the day. Then you have sustainability and also circular supply chains. And here specifically is the focus is on having something that's more eco-friendly from a design, whether it's reusable materials or recyclability or low waste production, anything that can drive sort of green innovation and being responsible in terms of manufacturing and production from a green perspective. So that's where Industry 5.0 is coming into play. Mass customization and hyper personalization. And this is so you can tailor make the products to the scale using AI, using 3D printing, using robotics, using drones, everything else from a 4IR that you can use, but you are meeting the demand for a customer that has a unique and a personal experience. You're not just, putting a machine to do it. Then we have supply chain resilience and decentralization. And here it's having a very much of a smarter and adaptive supply chain because you want to increase, decentralized manufacturing, on-demand logistics. You want to push through where you are focusing primarily on the customer as opposed to focusing on how best you can save money. So both human interface as well as machinery to come together to find better ways and elements of how you can make your supply chain a lot more resilient. Then you have AI and predictive analytics. And this is more from a decision making perspective and also proactive decision making perspective. It's using like artificial intelligence or using big data analytics or machine learning and to gain insight from that specific, three elements in order for you to make better decisions. And then the last one is blockchain for transparency. You want to be able to provide, records or data that is sort of transparent, but it's also tamper proof. You want to improve, traceability, accountability, all of these things from a supply chain perspective. So when we look at Industry 5.0, we want to look at it as having that 4IR capability in terms of technology, plus having a human intelligence, plus having some sort of sustainability. And that's what will prove to be, especially in this century and decade, a very successful business unit. So it's not about having just machines and automation that's now smarter than you. It's about having the collaboration between humans, between technologies, so that you can build either a business or a product or a market or an industry that is a lot more personalized. It can withstand things like the pandemic, so it's a lot more resilient. And it's also sustainable, recycling, reducing waste, eco friendly, green supply chain, green logistics. All of this is now at the forefront of your business. Okay. Is there any questions for me? I think that basically concludes our learning unit 5. As I mentioned in our next live lecture, which I think is the 30th of September, we will be doing um, our assignment review or our assignment to PACER and going through our assignment 2 um, just so that you can look at different elements and think differently and do more application and do better referencing, whatever the case may be. So I'll sort of do a post-mortem on assignment 1 and then a review on assignment 2 and how best we can understand and explain it. Is there any questions for me? I take it as a no. Okay, guys, you have a fantastic day and week, and I will chat to you soon. Thank you. Bye.